All right, Shalom is real. I want to give all praises, all honor, and all glory to whom it rightfully belongs, which is Yahweh, Bahashem Yahweh Shai, Bahashem Rakak Padash, for allowing me to do another lesson. Yahweh being who the world ignorantly calls God, Yahweh Shai being his son, who the world ignorantly calls Jesus Christ, and there's no God beside them. Double honors to the elder apostles and the elder bishops of Great Millstone for being faithful witnesses to the Holy Spirit, and salutations to the elect, whom the Lord hath given ears to hear. Now, before I get into the title of this lesson, I want to bring this precept out. This is the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 15 and verse 58. In the NLT, it says, "So my dear brothers and sisters, be strong and immovable. Always work enthusiastically for the Lord, for you know that nothing you do for the Lord is ever useless." All right, and just want to exhort you, brothers and sisters, to continue to do this work. For everything that we do in the Lord is going to be accounted for. In times of mercy, the Lord is going to remember our works. All right, the sacrifices you made for this truth, for Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahweh Shai, that's going to be accounted. That's going to be accounted to you in the time of Judgment Day. So without further ado, I want to get into So I was watching the Apostle Gabar the other day, and actually he'd been saying that, well, from what from the videos I've been watching of his, he'd been speaking a lot on throughout the years, us as so-called blacks, which are the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and Levi, really all the tribes, right? We've been known as other names other than who we truly are, which are the children of Israel. And it got me to thinking on this phrase, which, yeah, we're going to get into that too. But yeah, it got me thinking on this phrase. I would hear from time to time from my pops. He would say, I was called everything but a child of God. Speaking on, being cursed out. And I found that interesting because, as we are under the curses written of in Deuteronomy 28, one being that we should be called proverbs and bywords, we were known racially, especially the so-called blacks, were known racially as colored, African American, right, here we go. Is it? No, not that one. I was looking it up. Okay. So I asked the chat, right? What are all the names African Americans have been called over the years? So it says over the centuries, the societal, political, and self-designated names used for African Americans have continuously evolved. These terms reflect a deep history of displacement, systemic struggle, and the ongoing reclamation of identity. The evolution of collective nomenclature. The terminology used to describe people of African descent in the United States shifted in response to the socio-political climate. All right. In other words, what you were identified as racially changed based upon where you were at. All right. What time period? So it says early 17th to 18th centuries. European colonizers initially used a variety of interchangeable descriptors, including Moor, Blackamoor, Ethiopian, and Negro. At this time, some early mutual aid organizations formed by free black freedmen self-identified as African. It says chattel slavery between the 18th and 19th centuries. During slavery, white enslavers routinely stripped individuals of their native names and imposed anglicized biblical or classical Greek and Roman natures. Following emancipation, formerly enslaved people often chose new surnames, frequently adopting the names of former enslavers. Right? And that's interesting enough because you might say, well, we named ourselves. Well, no, these names came from what we were called. Remember the scriptures say we shall discontinue from that heritage. So our people as slaves only identified as to what their master called them. It says frequently adopting the names of former enslavers or prominent African American figures while also creating distinctly African American first names. In the mid-19th and mid-20th centuries, the term colored became a prominent institutionalized designation for the race. It was eventually accompanied and partially replaced by Negro, which was widely adopted across black-led organizations and literature. It's the civil rights and black power eras. Intellectuals and activists led a shift toward black and Afro-American to promote racial pride, a rejection of Eurocentric standards, and a reconnection to the broader African diaspora. This period also saw a rise in adopting Islamic and traditional African names as a political statement to renounce historical slave names. And then it says from the 1980s to the present, it says promoted by leaders like the Reverend Jesse Jackson in the 1980s, the term African American gained widespread prominence. It established an ethnic identity parallel to other hyphenated Americans, emphasizing ancestral origins. Today, black and African American are used interchangeably by many, though some identify with more diasporic or mixed race terms. It says derogatory and pejorative labels. Throughout American history, African Americans have been subjected to numerous racial slurs and derogatory terms coined by white society. These epithets were historically utilized to enforce segregation, maintain white supremacy, and dehumanize the community. Scholars, sociologists, and the University of Arkansas note that these archaic labels include terms like darky and coon, alongside animalistic and degrading comparisons used in news media and popular culture for decades. And even the term black, we always go into it, means, actually let's get the etymology real quick. So, as you see, I decided to go to the Merriam instead. So it gives you all the various uses for the word black. One being having the very dark color of the night sky or the eye's pupil, usually black, of or relating to any of various populating groups of especially African ancestry, often considered as having dark pigmentation of the skin, but in fact having a wide range of skin colors. Of or relating to black people, and often especially to African Americans of their culture. It says characterized by the absence of light, reflecting or transmitting little or no light. It says old-fashioned, literary, thoroughly sinister or evil, wicked, right? And mind you, these names were passed down to us in old times by our slave masters, right? And obviously, I mean, you could look at me right now. You obviously see a brown hue. All right. Even a darker Israelite, a darker person than me, he's still a darker brown. Okay. So we were made to be looked at as wicked, right? As having the absence of light, which truly we did, because we walked away from Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahweh Shai. We walked away from that wisdom, which gave us light. All right. But yeah, we, as it is written, we're known as proverbs and bywords. And before I continue, I want to grab these videos, right? Because racially, right, that's another thing. And this also proves who we are, all right? But let me not do too much talking, because I don't want to talk over myself. So let me grab these various TikTok videos and go from there.
Given their Middle Eastern. Race and ethnicity are often used interchangeably, but they're not the same thing. You might think you're being anti-racist by swapping them, but you're just being inaccurate. Race is a system that was invented incrementally over the past 600 years to create and rank human differences like skin tones, facial features, hair textures, and more. These differences do vary across humanity. But scientists have conclusively proven that race is not based in any biological fact. The meaning attached to these differences is based on white supremacist Eurocentric standards that place whiteness and proximity to whiteness at the top. Ethnicity refers to shared cultural background and heritage. You can be racialized differently to someone and still be in the same ethnic group. Racialization varies depending on where you are in the world. In the United States, I'm racialized as a mixed-race black woman. But in South Africa, I would be racialized as colored. My ethnicity is Louisiana Creole, based on my ancestral and cultural heritage. My ethnicity is based on facts, while my race is based on perception. Both race and ethnicity speak to human differences. Even though
right, so she pretty hold on, let me finish
ethnic
it off.
Discrimination does exist and is rampant, ethnicity was not created to rank and separate human beings in the way that race was invented to do racism. So they're really not the same thing. Smarter in second.
Yeah, Salakia for that corny ass fucking you know, me personally, like, you know, it's a little side note, but I really hate when you have like certain, you have we say so-called, right? Because we know that they're Israelites, but today they would be known as black, right? But when you have so-called black women that put on that fucking Edomite sound, you know, if you wasn't watching the video, you would thought this was a fucking Edomite. All right, that it's like a robotic, almost like a robotic tone. But like I said, that's a little rant. Nevertheless, you know, she brought out the fact that race is a social construct. All right, and it's usually attached to a perception, as we went into. Now, there's another one. Let me play this one. I think it's this one.
Did you know race is
Yeah, let me play this one, because she gets into it as well.
social construct? While people are categorized by skin color and different hair textures, that type of division is not rooted biologically speaking. Let's talk about it in 1 minute. The idea of race as a hierarchy emerged during the Enlightenment to justify slavery and racism. And those who are considered white does change over time. In fact, Irish people weren't always considered white, and Arab Americans were considered white from 1909 to 1944, when they were finally given the Middle Eastern category option, or the North African option. And since we can collectively change who's considered white and who is not, that kind of hints to the fact that it is a socially constructed idea. But even though race is a social invention, what is super important is to understand that it was a system of government, it was a system of society, it was rooted in society, and therefore this hierarchy has real consequences today. Racialized groups, so people who are uniquely impacted by their racial categorization, experience systemic inequalities of housing, education, employment, and opportunities. In 2016, the media...
I even seen a video how certain people, like say if you're a black person and you need a transplant or something like that, versus a white person that needs a transplant, a so-called black person versus a so-called white person. We got to say it like that, you know, because that's a lie, as we're going into. Now, if you're a so-called black person, it's actually harder for you, according to this guy's video, as opposed to a so-called white person. You know, and it makes perfect sense when you look at, you know, the redlining and as far as, you know, property laws for so-called blacks versus so-called whites. Right? And all throughout this society, we are looked down upon, all right? Put by the wayside, so to speak.
Wealth for white families in the U.S. was 171,000 compared to experience systemic inequalities of housing, education, employment, and opportunities. In 2016, the median wealth for white families in the U.S. was 171,000 compared to 17,600 for black families. This generational inequality in economics really goes to show how structural racism in the context of U.S. and Jim Crow laws and redlining really create division in society. Even though race is a social constructed idea, because it is so deeply ingrained into our societies, it is creating so much division and makes life difficult for people. Understanding race as a social construct really goes to understand how stereotypes and inequalities still persist. Did you know race?
And it really goes back to Jacob and Esau. That's pretty much what it is. Whereas when you talk about blacks, right? Or when society, all right, speaks on blacks, you're talking about a specific group of people. Which again, we went into the word black, it means evil or void of light. Now, even though, which I'm going to play this next video, right? I'm going to just let him speak because he pretty much goes into it. It was a famous comedian, George Carlin. Like I said, I'm going to just let him speak because I didn't want to give away what he's saying.
Some of these speech issues concerning minorities. First of all, I say...
Yeah, he goes in. So
some of these speech issues concerning minorities. First of all, I say black. I say black because most black people prefer black. I don't say people of color because it's dishonest. It means precisely the same thing as colored people, which is an insult. So if you're not willing to say colored people, you shouldn't be willing to say people of color. And besides, to me, the whole idea of color seems a bit specious, really. I mean, what should we call white people? People of no color? Isn't pink a color? And in fact, white people are not really white at all. They're different shades of pink and olive and beige. In other words, they're colored. And black people are rarely black. I see mostly various shades of brown and tan, and in fact, some light-skinned black people are darker than the darkest white people. I'm sorry, lighter than the darkest.
Like I said, he's cooking. Now, again, it has to be a social construct because even if you go by the color of a person's skin, that you know, tells their race. Why is not a black person? Why, when you think of a black person, you only think of a so-called African American, not an Indian, you know, or a person who calls themselves black? Why do you not think of an Indian, a so-called Afghani? You know, why is it only attributed to a particular group of people? And that's what he's getting into.
White people. Look how dark the people in India are. They're dark brown, but they're considered white. May I see the color chart, please? People of color is an awkward phrase that obscures meaning rather than enhancing it. What shall we call fat people? People of size? I also don't say African Americans. I find it cumbersome and confusing. Which part of Africa are we talking about? Egypt? Egypt is in Africa, but Egyptians aren't black. They're like the people in India. They're dark brown white people, but they're Africans. So why wouldn't an Egyptian citizen who becomes an Egyptian who becomes a U.S. citizen be called an African American? The same would apply to South Africa. Suppose a white racist from South Africa becomes an American citizen. Couldn't he call himself an African American? If for no other reason than just to bother black people. And what about a black person born in South Africa who becomes an American citizen? Is he an African American or is he a South African American? Or is he simply a South African American African American? You know, it's just so much more tedious liberal labeling. Liberals should be taught that labels divide people, and I think we could probably do with fewer labels, not more. Now, one more group, the Indians. I call them Indians because that's what they are. They're the Indians. There's nothing wrong with the word. First of all, it's important to know that Indian, that word probably does not derive from Columbus believing he had reached India in 1492. India was called Hindustan. More likely, the word derives from Columbus's description of the people he found here. He was an Italian who spoke very poor Spanish, and in his written accounts, he called the Indians una gente in Dios, a people in God, in Dios, Indians. It's a perfectly noble thing. And I simply can't justify this awkward phrase, Native Americans. First of all, they're not natives.
You know, that's heavy enough because that's actually historic. Well, I seen it. It was a movie I sometimes speak on. It's called Conquest of Paradise. 1492 Conquest of Paradise, and they tell you in that movie, because you know this guy Christopher Columbus, which his true name is Cristobal Colon, he's very adamant on coming into the side of the world. And I believe it was a priest he was talking to. He was like, well, how do you know there's substance on that side of the world? And he quoted to the book in the Apocrypha, Esdras, as a source. Right? And then also, remember, this devil, Cristobal Colon, he brought a Hebrew interpreter with him. You know, a guy that was in that side of the world that spoke various languages, one being Hebrew, because he knew what he would encounter. Right? It tells us in the book of 2nd Esdras, the 13th chapter, that the Israelites came to a land known as Arsareth, right? Another land, which he knew where it was. Right? So that's heavy, as George Carlin speaks on how he called our people a people in God. But, you know, like Apostle Tahar says, lessons within lessons. So let's get it.
They came here from Asia over the Bering Land Bridge. In fact, there are no natives anywhere in the world. Everyone is from somewhere else. All people are refugees, immigrants, or aliens. If there are natives anywhere, it would have to be people still living in the Great Rift Valley in Africa. So everyone is just visiting. So much for native. As far as calling them Americans is concerned, well, how can I say this? We steal their hemisphere, destroy 500 cultures, kill 20 million, stick the rest of them on the worst land we can find, and then as a special bonus, we name them after ourselves. It's embarrassing. It's just embarrassing. The truth is, most Indians are insulted by the term Native American. The American Indian movement will tell you that. If you wish to please Indians, try calling them by their traditional names: Pawnee, Mohawk, Navajo, Seminole. Some of these speech issues can...
Yeah, so you see why I had to let it play through. I mean, of course, I stopped it to speak my part, but he cooked, you know. And now let's get this. So in Deuteronomy 28, right, and verse 37, it says, in Deuteronomy 28 and 37, the proverb and byword, right, Deuteronomy 28, and let's get it. All right, Deuteronomy 28. And let me read 15. But it shall come to pass, if thou wilt not hearken unto the voice of Yahweh thy power, to observe to do all his commandments and his statutes which I command thee this day, that all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. Right? So the Lord proceeds to curse us out, right? So now in verse 37, it says, and thou shalt become an astonishment, a proverb, and a byword among all nations, whither the Yahweh shall lead thee. Okay? So now we go into that word proverb and byword. It says in Deuteronomy 28 and 37, the proverb and byword refers to God's warning that a disobedient Israel would lose its favored status, becoming a tragic spectacle. Instead of being a praised nation, they will be mocked by foreigners who would use Israel's ruin as a cautionary tale and slur. Now the people you encountered, of so-called natives, right? And you gave them your names, such as Colombian, Puerto Rico, all right? Which Puerto Rico goes in a rich port, but you plundered them, and now they're poor, right? You got a national day called what? Thanksgiving. It's really Thanksgiving, right? Columbus Day. Like I said, you got a land called Colombia. So it says, breaking down the meaning of the terms, a proverb translates to a nation that serves as a living example or metaphor. Observers would look at Israel's judgment and use them to warn others. A byword translates to a taunt or a sharp insult. Black, Negro, colored, tomahawks, wetbacks. That we were known, and amongst those, devils, those elites, what they call us. All right. It says neighboring people will use the name of an Israelite as a slang term of ridicule or a curse. It says Deuteronomy 28 sets the covenant terms, blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. So that's pretty much all I wanted to grab on that. And then I had asked the chat, were black people ever known as the sole children of God before the Israelite movement? So before the rise of the Black Israelite movement, which is what they call us, in the late 19th and earlier 20th centuries, right? And to confirm, that's not what we call ourselves. All right? That's a name given to us, as we just went over in various videos, various times during this lesson, that we are not black. We have various shades of brown, right? But just as they do everything else, they put us into categories. As a matter of fact, the scriptures call him the accuser of our brethren. That word accuser goes into the Greek kategoreo, right? So it says no major religious or historical tradition recognized black people as the sole children of God. Instead, monotheist traditions historically viewed the children of God through either universal inclusion or other specific exclusive bloodlines. So it says the concept of divine status regarding people of African descent before this era was typically framed through the following lenses. Universalism. Universalist theology holds that all of humanity are children of God regardless of race, a foundational concept that deeply influenced black abolitionist theology and the black social gospel. The curse of Ham. Historically, many European and American Christian theologians used the biblical curse of Ham to wrongly justify the enslavement and subjugation of African peoples. Right, so it gets into a whole bunch of other things, but the point I wanted to ask is, again, how did that the point I was getting at by asking that question is because it is written, which I'll grab it in the NLT, that we were to be known as a no people. At least not the people, that the Heavenly Father is dealing with. So this is the book of Hosea, chapter 1, verse 9, right? And again, being under these curses, as, being proverbs and bywords, the Lord said, name him Lo Ami, not my people. For Israel is not my people, and I am not their God. Yet the time will come when Israel's people will be like the sands of the seashore, too many to count. Then at the place where they were told, you are not my people, it will be said, you are children of the living God. All right. And it's being said that more and more as, this Israelite thing of ours, which really is the Heavenly Father, as it is also written, truth shall spring up. Something is sprung up, that means it was suppressed. Right? So truth is springing up and the world is seeing what we're seeing as factual. Right? Various scholars, various even like the scriptures say, their tongue shall fall upon themselves. Even various so-called Jews, so-called rabbis, as they are known today, make books about who the true children of Israel are. All right. What's that book that we always bring out? What's with not shit. Was it John Adams or one of the former presidents, if I'm not mistaken? And they spent time with the natives, and they were going into how, they kept the Sabbaths. They would sing the Shema. They would call on Yahweh. They call him Yohewa. Right? So they noticed various Israelite traditional customs. Hosea 1:11. Then the people of Judah and Israel will unite together. They will choose one leader for themselves, and they will return from exile together. What a day that will be, the day of Jezreel, when God will again plant his people in his land. All right? But again, verse 10 says, in the place where it was said unto them, you are not my people, there shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. So that's us. Okay? And I want to finish it off with this phrase, as I mentioned in the beginning of this lesson, which sparked this lesson. So it was a phrase that I would always hear, hear my father talk about stories of, him dealing with other people. And it says, I was called everything but a child of God, expression meaning. So it says the idiom called everything but a child of God means that someone was subjected to a barrage of severe insults and verbal abuse. It implies that no negative name, profanity, or criticism was held back, contrasting the worst possible insults with the pure, dignified concepts of a child of God. And dig this. For further context, this expression typically appears in the following ways. It is heavily used in casual storytelling to describe intense arguments, heated confrontations, or times when someone lost their temper and threw every possible insult at another person. Cultural roots. Found frequently in Southern and African American vernacular. The contrast derives from religion. In many traditions, calling someone a child of God is meant to emphasize inherent love, worth, and godness. And goodness, Salakia. Thus, being called everything but highlights the absolute lack of respect or restraint in the critic's remarks. So it's spiritual that amongst our people, especially amongst the so-called blacks, they say this. Whereas, us today, again, just to bring it home, under the curses, being cursed out, being called everything but a child of God, says this. So, I just wanted to point this out to you, Akim and Akwaf. It's just comparing, like the scriptures say, comparing spiritual things with spiritual. So I'm gonna leave it at that. Lord willing, you Akim and Akwaf were edified. All praises to Yahweh Ba'ashim Yahushai, Barakathum, Wa Shalom. Shalom.